So we've got The Hobbit here. Did anybody else, how many of you guys read the book versus listened to it? So read it. How many of you read it?
Twice.
How many listened? The Ring brothers, all the farmers. All right. So, what were the initial thoughts? How many of you looked forward to reading this book? How many of you the idea of reading a fantasy book was nothing but pain?
I wouldn't say nothing but pain. It was outside of what I would usually read, like these days. But I enjoyed it nonetheless. It was good read, good story.
I'm in Ben's camp, or Benjamin's camp. This was a book that for me was not in my usual genre, and is not something that I would, even on a crazy Friday night at the library, it's not something that I pull off the shelf and take home for the weekend.
I loved it. I was really excited to read it.
I was really entertained by it. I enjoyed listening to it in the tractor. Yeah.
Rob.
Welcome, Rob. We're doing the obligatory. Did you like it? Was this a painful book for you? For me, I used to read a lot of fantasy books when I was younger, and now I haven't done it in a long time. And it actually took me a little while to be like, oh, this is just a book for fun. I don't have to be hewing giant metaphors out of the rock or trying to figure out some deep inner meaning. And once I got through maybe 2 or 3 chapters where I was just like, oh, it's kind of fun just to have an enjoyable experience with a book, then I really got way more into it.
How did you feel about the prose? Like just kind of the quality of the words that were used and the whatever. I'm that's a kind of a goofy way to get into this. Obviously, I'm telling you that I liked it.
I loved it. I think
yeah.
that the book was written in a way that it is like the storyteller's book, because if you read if you read it out loud, you only have to go a few words before you figure out who's speaking, even when there's a whole bunch of dialect or dialogue changing who's saying what, which means that if you're reading it in funny voices, and I was reading it to my baby Violet, then you're able to change up those voices really easily. So this was written in a way that you could tell it as a story, I thought.
Yeah, I was excited to read it again. I had read it a couple years ago, but I didn't realize how much I had forgotten. Once I got to the end, I was like, oh wow, like this is a surprise. But I really enjoyed it, and I had actually read The Lord of the Rings first, even before I read The Hobbit the first time. And I was struck again by how much more of a lighter story The Hobbit is. And The Lord of the Rings definitely is harder to get into, but there's more of that extracting meaning out of it. But I really enjoyed The Hobbit.
Ian, you've read both Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. What's your take?
The Hobbit was easier to read, and I just kind of slogged through The Lord of the Rings, but they were still both pretty good. I like the kind of underlying story.
How did you find them, Ian? How did they become books that you wanted to read?
We had The Hobbit lying around our house one day, so I picked it up back in 3rd grade and then read it because I was like, ooh, a big book, now I can be cool. So then I read it and it was pretty neat, but then I finally read it again maybe a month or so ago because I had time again and I'd kind of forgotten what all happened. So then since I'd already figured out what the plot and stuff was, I was able to focus on some of the more deeper stuff.
So for the people that like this is your first time, were you surprised by the direction the book took, or did you feel like you knew the general gist of the story?
I was pretty much focused back then on a little short hairy-footed guy going to help slay a dragon with some dwarves. And that was pretty much the biggest meaning I got out of it back in 3rd grade.
I was tarnished by having seen the movies a couple years ago first, so I went in pretty aware of the general direction of the story.
Not me. I would never go see that movie. That would be like the last movie I would ever go choose to see. So I was not tainted by that.
Probably for different reasons than me, though. I felt exactly the same way, but because I had read this and was a big fan of it and knew that it would be a giant piece of garbage that they put out from Hollywood with it.
I think that's accurate. I enjoyed the book more, I'd say, than the movies. It seems like I like the movies quite a bit, though, to be honest. I guess I'm
The
not gonna
Hobbit
downgrade
movies?
it. I like the Hobbit movies quite a bit, but I had no
Okay.
bar because I didn't read the book first.
Yeah.
I love the Lord of the Ring movies. Not that it's, I guess, movie night, but the book was good. I think it's that same sort of thing where like the Hobbit book was this big, right? But the Lord of the Rings is this. So what they tried to do to make that book, it was basically, my copy was 300 pages, and it was funny because I was reading it. I would notice that, okay, 100 pages, that's like exactly where first movie ended, where, they're on that tree and it's burning and that whole conflict is happening. That's the end of movie 1. End of movie 2 is at like my page 200, like 4 or 5, and Smaug like flies out and he's burning down the city. And then movie 3 is the rest of the book. So there was a lot of filler that they put into those that wasn't in the book that I was like looking for because I'd seen the movies, and it wasn't there. So
Yeah, I'm glad I watched the movie before I read the book because it helped me really imagine everything that was going on, because I feel like there wasn't a lot of description about like what the characters look like, and yeah, I actually really like the movies too, but
It's interesting you say that, Danica, because one of the things that I was commenting to Rob earlier today, one of the things I really liked about the way that it was written was that the scenes and the people were not overwrought with description. And I feel like one of my biggest complaints about fantasy is that they go into such vivid descriptions that you're sitting there being like, okay, now they look like what? Okay, now I'm picturing this and this and this. And he just kind of like, they're dwarves, they got hairy feet, they go into the forest and is like not huge amounts of description. So I had kind of the reverse on that I really liked how barren his descriptions were.
their personality descriptions were really thorough, I thought. Like each of the dwarves kind of had their own character by the end of the book, and the Hobbit had his character, and yeah.
Yeah,
Were you able to keep those different hobbit or dwarves apart, like in your mind?
Man, you're telling me you can't tell the difference between Fili and Kili and Bombor and Thorin and
Beaver, Bifer, Beaufort.
Yeah.
I got some of them, but not all of them.
Yeah,
and
same.
I'm usually really bad with names, so the fact that I got some of them, I was kind of doing okay.
So some of that stuff feels like you're reading one of these. We had a report at school board here a while back for it's some kid that had done something, and so the principal had redacted everything in there, and then he had assigned alphabet characters for each of the students' name, and then he read this report verbatim to the school board. It's like 4 pages. Student A did this to student M, who did this to student K, who related. I'm like just swimming in all these very similar sorts of things, trying to figure out who is who and what they're doing.
That's the way I feel in 7, or not to throw it off, but I mean, that's the way I feel in 7 Pillars right now. Throwing around like names and stuff, but
you've still got 2 months on 7 Pillars, so you've got a ways to go on that.
Did anybody listen to the reading that was like, that I put out the YouTube link where it was like a guy doing the voices and everything?
I know Nicholas had said he had started it, but I didn't.
I didn't.
Yeah, I mean, it was abridged, so it's it's kind of an additional thing, I think.
I
But
did about half of it, and it was good. Oh, it was a cute little thing.
yeah. I mean, it's definitely not like it's a children's kind of a thing, but I don't know. Having those voices in your head when you're reading the book makes it just like zoom through. It's miraculous, at least for me.
I can see that where that would help. It would be a sort of a different character development than what they look like or smell like or where they live or that sort of thing. That would be helpful.
Well, even just all the voices the guy that does the audiobook does, it was like, oh, you're talking in this person's voice now. That was something that, yeah, made it fly by.
How are the songs in the audio? Because like that was one of the hardest parts for me was to read those songs.
It was kind of weird, but it seemed like the guy spent a lot of time to try and get them right.
I actually, since I was reading it out loud, I would always put those to some kind of a beat. And by saying them out loud, even when Violet wasn't around and I was reading it to myself, the songs were not as tedious. Like saying them out loud made more sense than just reading them in your head. To me, the reading songs or poetry just in your mind almost never works. There's something about it actually being spoken out loud.
So that brings up an interesting thing. Did you end up setting that to some sort of a tune? Did you match that to a tune that you've was there a cadence there that you found that created a sort of common harmony in the poetry or the music?
None that I would do for anything other than an illiterate child that can't repeat them.
You won't grab and sing the Tra-la-la-la-lolly song for us really quick?
No, You know, before we go past the movie part, there was one thing that I thought was really interesting. I went through and was looking up on YouTube differences between the movie and the book, and I came upon CGP Grey, who puts out a lot of really interesting explainer videos, and he had the video about the scene when they're all getting out of the whoever captured them, the wood elves, right? And
sure.
So they had to get out through the barrels.
The barrels, yeah.
And apparently the barrel scene is like a 20-minute scene in the movie where it's like just a few lines in the book. And it was really interesting. I'll throw a link in there in the description because it was like him saying like, this is what they've done to the whole movie, where they've taken one scene and then way expanded it out. And it was just an interesting, I just didn't want to forget that thing. So other commentary, like when you guys went through there, I think the elves are meant to be these like good characters, but I found myself not enjoying any part with the elves. Like I felt like they were kind of creepy. I felt like they were kind of unfairly holy in some way. Like I really didn't like the elves. Did other people feel this way, or am I alone there?
Like the wood elves or like the really old elf?
All elves.
Wow. I think you might be a dwarf.
Yeah, I was gonna say like the wood elves at first were a little bit tough to come to like, but honestly I felt myself disliking the dwarves more and more as the book went on. And I don't know, they kind of redeemed themselves a little bit towards the end, but I don't know, especially once they got towards the end and they're just like obsessed with this gold. I did not find myself liking them very much. Definitely was more on the side of the elves.
Yeah, because they had that like air of ungratefulness. Oh, you're muted, Miriam. I see your mouth moving. No, but yeah, they seemed like ungrateful anywhere they went. To a degree, they were grateful, but they seemed expectant. I guess yeah, they definitely had gratitude, but they were expectant.
Well, it was interesting that Smaug actually kind of had them nailed, right? Like, you know, he went down to talk to this dragon, and Bilbo's down there hanging out with him, and he's supposed to be all evil. And Smaug, like, actually described the dwarves in pretty finite detail exactly who they ended up being.
He did eat a lot of them.
Maybe it was just archetypal.
Probably. I mean, these are archetypal groups of characters, right? Like I don't know. I feel like the dwarves are some sort of representation of Scotsmen. Like they're kind of, you know, fixated on things. They delve into the earth. They're a little coarse and stout, you know. And then I think the elves are like, you know, you could argue they're the Welsh or something like this. And the hobbits being the Irish, like they're just kind of happy to be home and have their little gardens and, you know, don't want to worry about the outside world. And there's kind of, you know, aspects like that that go throughout the whole book. Tolkien was a huge scholar of, you know, medieval poetry and languages and all these things in Northern Europe, and he wove a lot of that stuff into the story there.
Well, it's interesting because that entire era is I mean the whole druid concept and fairies and nymphs and things that are alive in the woods, that is the home to all those people. So it's kind of an interesting follow-on book to that kind of concept. I don't think that we have in the US, I don't think we have that same sort of cultural background, except for maybe a few parts of Appalachia or something like that.
Except we do make books and movies about those things.
I was struck by how long it took them to get everywhere, right? Like it would be like weeks, or, you know, they'd spend a month somewhere. And when I had started, because in my book, the opening is like a map, and I was like, oh, it's not that big. You just go from here to over to there. And then, but like for them to be traveling long times, I found that to be like just a different thing than most books. That the passage of time and the passage of distance was an unusual concept within this book.
Yeah, there wasn't a huge sense of urgency. An interesting tidbit to throw out for anybody who's seen the Lord of the Rings movies, but maybe won't take the time to read the book, is that in the literature that takes place over 7 years. I think it's 7. It might even be, I'm pretty sure it's 7 or 17, but it's like a 7 number, like their journey from leaving the Shire to getting that ring in, they got to throw it in the lava. I can't remember the name of the mountain, but
Mordor.
Yeah, Mordor. That's right. But yeah, but it's like they have this goal that they're moving towards, but the sense of urgency to achieve that is sort of, it is kind of that there's an orientation or an emphasis on the journey.
There you go. Yeah, that's exactly where I was gonna. You led right into it there. This is exactly like the takeaway from motorcycle maintenance, right? Not exactly, of course, but the point being that your character is forged in all of these difficulties and being with your team and seeing through the mission and all of this, but it's not in getting the gold or defeating the enemy or anything like that.
It's interesting that you bring that up, because that was one of the things that I didn't like as much about The Hobbit, is that I don't really feel like there's a point to it. But now I thought that I had understood and integrated the point of motorcycle maintenance, and now I'm realizing maybe I didn't actually learn that lesson yet.
Well,
because I found myself along the journey, it's cool, but what's the point?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I feel like Bilbo has a character arc where he starts out as this kind of goofy, provincial guy working at his farm there or whatever. And then he becomes this worldly character who defeated the greatest enemy, that they've had, and actually learned to, he bargained the Arkenstone against Thor's. Goodness, I'm losing it here. Thorin. Goodness, yeah, Thorin. Against his share of the treasure there, right? And bought. What did he do with it? I can't even remember.
He bargained for peace because the money that the town had wanted was a 20th.
Yeah, for the Lakemen. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, and he does kind of come back like a legend.
Yeah.
Like at the beginning of The Lord of the Rings, my copy of The Hobbit had the first chapter of the Fellowship of the Ring. So I read it just out of curiosity. to see, because I knew that each of those books is like the length of this book. So I was like, okay, how does this open up? Because I love those movies, the Lord of the Rings movies, more so than the Hobbit movies, which I did enjoy. But yeah, they kind of he describes Bilbo as, this character of the town, kind of eclectic, right? Got all this money, not very social, and yeah. So he carries that character development with him 50 years later, or whatever, to
Well, and even in the end of the book, like, it is interesting that the hobbits didn't like celebrate him and think that he was great for having gone out and done this. They just were kind of like, he's a weirdo that left.
Yeah, right. They're deliberately set up as not wanting to ever have adventures or do anything exciting. They just want to stay home in their hobbit holes and be comfortable, and that's it.
I thought it was funny they all thought he was dead.
Yeah, and selling his stuff.
How much of this do you suppose is a metaphor for all of the men coming back from World War One, back to these provincial areas that they came from, and those men trying to reconcile what they've seen and the bigger worldview that they have now, coming back to the little shire that they came from, that nobody knows what is, if it's happened more than 2 miles away, it didn't happen, kind of a thing. I wonder how much of a metaphor there is in that within this book, or how much that leverages the background of the story.
Tolkien was strenuously telling people that there are no parallels to the real world here, but it's hard to imagine that that flavor of the story didn't come to him. I mean, he actually fought in World War One, so there's definitely a chance of that, and it'd be hard to argue that his like giant set piece battle scenes and all these things were not somehow inspired by what he went through there.
Well, and all of your experiences are going to shape the things you think about.
It's striking a little bit to me, in a really broad way, the similarities of some of these authors, like Eric Mark, when we read All Quiet on the Western Front. That book ends before he comes back. I mean, he ends up being killed on the battlefield, but there's a follow-on book to another guy that does come back, written by the same guy, and it's this coming home and trying to relate to people that haven't seen what you've seen, and haven't seen it in that way, or what just, I mean, it's like you've almost shifted worlds completely, and you're coming back to a foreign land that you grew up in.
So when I was about to leave for the Peace Corps, my dad was like, when you come back, you're going to have this experience, and you should just know about it ahead of time, which is people are going to say, oh, you were in the Peace Corps. Tell me about that. And what they want is a 30-second answer, if that. And what you have is like this thing that you need to like compress into something that you can explain. And he's like, they're never going to understand, and they're never going to want to take the time. And they're going to be, right as you are trying to tell them something important to you, they're going to be like, check out my new TV, or look at this other thing that's happened. And he's like, it's on you to deal with that. And it was really helpful to me to have that going in, because I think that that's exactly what you're describing. Like, if you had just come back from war, all the people that didn't go to war, all the hobbits that didn't go and get to do all this crazy stuff with dwarves, they're going to struggle with being able to explain it. And I wonder if it's even worth trying.
Yeah, one thing I find, like, my roommate, she's a creative writing major, and she was telling me that every author's first book is like autobiographical in some way. And I know The Hobbit isn't his first published work, but I could see like how he, like brought that in to like share some of his experience. Not like necessarily that he meant to share it, but it happens to just be in there. So I could see that the World War One playing a role in it.
One of my biggest disappointments was the lack of description for the Battle of the Five Armies, where I don't remember. It's been a long time since I have seen those movies. I saw each of them like once when they were in theaters, and that was it, and enjoyed them. But like, I don't remember him getting hit on the head with a rock at any point over the course of that, because that's basically the whole third movie, is like this big culmination of all of this stuff and these 5 different armies battling it out, and it kind of just begins in the book and he gets hit in the head with a rock and it's all over, and then it's like 30 pages of fallout.
Yeah, I feel like one of the things too that I was disappointed by was like I felt like the ring didn't show like the evil part as much too. And I felt like that was missing as well. Or maybe the movie just added that. I don't know.
I think that really came in from the Lord of the Rings side, right? Like the Hobbit ring was just kind of a plot device. It wasn't the overarching point of the whole thing.
Okay, that makes sense.
Well, and too, they said that ring would weigh on you over time, and it didn't affect you too much to begin with. And like Gollum used to wear it all the time, and he used to keep it with him all the time, but then it would feel hot or it would feel heavy, and it would make him feel bad, and so he would leave it out on the island until he needed it.
So I know there's a narrator narrating the story, but does the narrator ever tell you about things that happen when Bilbo is not there? I'm trying to remember this, but it doesn't. It's not obvious to me, right? And this might explain the difference that the movie is not done that way, right? And that when he gets hit over the head with the rock, the story fades to black and comes back, and it's something else going on.
There's sometimes that he briefly mentions what's happening, like when he's talking about how like the elves and the goblins have like heard of things, but yeah, it's usually very brief and just like an overview when Bilbo's not there, if I remember correctly.
Like when the eagles are looking down on the fires.
Yeah, I mean, he does describe things that aren't just like looking over top of Bilbo, but from reading it out loud, the author or the narrator is awesome. Like that's like the ultimate character, because he's always got this glimmer or kind of a half smile or I'm going to tell you, and he's like pulling you along. I found the narrator of the story to be the most likable character of all.
Do you think that would be kind of playing into Tolkien's storytelling ability, mostly, that he was able to create that kind of narrator?
Yeah, and I think it just kind of goes along with however he thought of. I mean, because this is like the famous book that people read to children, or it's one of them, and it just did such a good job of imagining the experience of reading it out loud as an adult to children, or it was just so well done.
Okay, I've got to hop off.
Good luck, Miriam. Go get him.
Thank you so much.
Good luck.
You got this, Miriam. Prevail.
Thank you.
Christina, what did you think of this book? You're ominously quiet.
I knew I was going to get called out. So I'll be honest, I bought the book, got really busy this month. I read the Spark Notes, but I was like, I'll just listen to everyone's discussion. But I was like, if I get called out, I'll be honest, I didn't read it this month, but I enjoyed the book. And AJ's like, you're going to have to read it next week. He goes, if you get called out, you have to finish it by the end of next week. So that was our discussion before I came downstairs. So I'll be reading it next week. But I'm really enjoying everyone's take on it and the different perspectives. And I think that will help me get through it. Just looking for the different things that everyone else has seen. So that's why I'm quiet.
So Ben, going back to your point about him getting hit on the head and you being disappointed, I'm almost the exact opposite. Like, I don't really enjoy vivid descriptions of battles because I get so confused in them that they aren't interesting to me. So for me, the fast forwarding through that and just being like, what happened was way better for me. I liked that.
I think it depends for me on that because, like in this one, it wasn't really about the battle. Like that wasn't the point of it. So it was just moving on to get through. And sometimes in some pieces of literature, it matters more, what happens during the events of the battle.
Yeah, like the
But
Battle
yeah,
of Hogwarts in the last Harry Potter book. Like, tell me that's not
yeah.
like the best battle reading ever.
Which
Like,
book is
skip
that?
to the end. That's like the seventh one
That's
where they attack the school, and there's like all this stuff going on, all these characters who've been developed over thousands of pages, and stuff's happening, and they're colliding. It's fun. See that sort of stuff culminate.
Yeah. No, we're talking about The Hobbit, but you got it. Harry Potter.
I think that's fair though, because you only really had like 250 preceding pages to build up, I guess care for these characters. So to like have a long, drawn out sort of climactic visual description, maybe, I don't know. I still wanted it, but
I like how there's a lot of little touches in it that makes it feel really like worn in and real to me. Like that there's some depth to it. Like things that just I don't know why, right? But they seem kind of random details. But like the thrush that comes and they talk to it and it flies, and like that's just fascinating, right? Like the runes and you can only read it under a certain moon and this kind of stuff. I mean, I really liked all of those kind of layered on details, that it wasn't just thrown out and then turn the crank and the characters move through the story, but it felt like there was meaning in a lot of the things that happened to them.
have you read or has anybody read the Silmarillion?
No.
That's Tolkien's sort of like, this is the world book. It's almost like an encyclopedia for this world that he's developed across the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit, where it talks about the beginning of history to the end of history, and it goes, just through all that. So like that layered meaning is definitely compounded in there in terms of like, he's just thought so deeply. Like he's got here's the names of the gods for this universe, and here's like the lore for this species and all that sort of stuff.
Did he ever actually publish that himself as a book, or is that compiled from notes that he wrote to like build the backstory?
That's a great question. I don't know the answer to.
I feel like he maybe didn't publish it himself. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but the few parts of it that I have looked at though are like biblical, right? And it's very hard. like him ham beget Jim Jam, and like on and on and on and on and on and on. It's quite elaborate and a bit much for me.
Brian,
That's
what were
like
your
you
thoughts? Yeah, go ahead.
That's like you were saying with that thrush. I kind of thought that part was kind of skipped over in the book. Like, how did the thrush tell them that, yeah, we heard this from the Hobbit and we're getting you this information? Or he just said, hey, shoot the arrow here to kill the dragon. I was totally expecting an all-out war with the Hobbit and them to kill the dragon, and here it flies down to the river people and they take care of it. And that was kind of a twist I didn't see coming. But just to see how much the Hobbit himself did, and grew into it for being of, low stature and not ever going out and seeing the world, to kind of saving the world and creating a new world and getting all the armies together through talking to all these, the little characters, the thrushes, and all the different things he did, like how he introduced himself to the dragon. He didn't say, I'm Bilbo Baggins, you never tell your name because your name has all the power in the world, is kind of the lore back in those days. And to see him, brag of all the things he did on his journey to get to the dragon, I thought was pretty cool.
That's right. Who was the guy that shot the arrow? The Bard? Bard?
Yeah, I think so.
The black arrow. I love that. That was a good detail too.
kind of makes me think of Vance's storyteller friend talking about the details.
Oh,
know,
yeah. Chris Bennett.
Yeah. I mean, that's why you seem so enthralled with his stories, and his stories are very good. But he says it's because of the details, right?
Yeah, I mean, like, and the details without becoming overwhelming. Like, it's so easy to be one of those people that's like, I'm going to put in every single detail and make it so you can't understand it. And I think there's the great example of him leaving out a lot of details is the spiders when they're in the, what's that called, the Milkwood Forest or the Mirkwood Forest.
Mirkwood, yeah.
And like suddenly there are spiders, suddenly all of his friends are in cocoons, but it's not overwrought with like, and this is the way the web was and exactly where they were in the trees. But as the story plays out, then it starts expanding more and more of the details, but that they're layered into the plot of the story.
The Silmarillion was actually the first book he published. A quick Google search tells me, and then he added to it as he worked his way through the Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings lore, and then he decided to publish those as their own books, and then he added some context after the Lord of the Rings, and his son Christopher published the final version, I guess, after he was after he died.
A whole bunch of his manuscripts were at Marquette, the university that I went to, and it is like thousands upon thousands of notebooks, not just pages, but like books and books and books and books and books filled with just his handwriting. And it must have
How
been
did they come to be there?
I was actually trying to look that up right before this thing got started. I don't know. And I remember it not thinking it was all that important when I was there, but then they always had signs up about it. But they had an entire section of the library just dedicated. You couldn't even go into it. It's all climate controlled. And
well, let me riff on for a second, right? So he was good buddies with C.S. Lewis, who is a famous Catholic, right? Maybe there's some Catholic connection here. I don't know. I don't know if he was a Catholic himself or not.
Yeah, I don't know. I remember being surprised because I always thought it was C.S. Lewis. And then somebody pointed out while I was at school, like, no, that's Tolkien. And they're definitely different people. Whereas C.S. Lewis, his writing was specifically Christian.
Hey, Vance, could you shoot Brian a link? He DM'd me on Twitter, my personal Twitter, and I didn't see it.
A link to
this.
To send it to who?
Brian.
Brian Scott.
Oh. Yeah. I can do that.
Yeah. Yeah, he was very Catholic. I know I'm Catholic, so I listen to a bunch of Catholic podcasts, and he gets brought up quite a bunch of the time, and how some of it is reflective of some of the Catholic faith and stuff, and I guess I find it interesting listening to all those podcasts.
Are you talking about Tolkien?
Yeah. Yes, Tolkien was Catholic. Yep.
I didn't know that.
And
no, Tolkien started out as an atheist, didn't he? And then through his association with C.S. Lewis, found religion.
Yeah, I don't know if he was atheist or what, but yeah.
I know there was considerable conflict early in their friendship, or considerable, maybe not conflict is the right word, but there was, that was kind of what cemented their early friendship, was all their long talks together, which I thought was kind of interesting, that they came from very different backgrounds from a spiritual standpoint, and then became fast friends and came together in what would you, I guess you'd call the middle of their friendship.
So it was C.S. Lewis that was influenced by Tolkien, and that's what made C.S. Lewis become more Catholic.
Really?
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
That's shocking. Wow.
Yeah, because muted myself. Wasn't C.S. Lewis more atheistic, and then he transitioned.
I read too.
Yeah. So yeah, that was the connection with those two.
Okay. I never can keep them straight which one was on which side, but
yeah.
Well, we read a lot of C.S. Lewis in college. That was like Mere Christianity, the Screw Tape Letters, all interesting stuff. I felt like this was a very hard book to write questions to for a like a book club, because I feel like on the one hand, narrative books or fiction books are easier to have conversations about because you can extract the meaning. But the fantasy aspect of this and the fact that Tolkien was like, it's not a metaphor for anything. Let me say it again. It's not a metaphor for anything. Made it kind of hard. Brian, welcome.
Hello.
There's like a clear opportunity, it feels like, to point out like the hero's journey idea here, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's all this is, right? Like, it's just absolute hero's journey all the way.
Really a long walk. When Vance was talking about doing this, I was like, this is like stereotypical, like how Vance talks about things in metaphors, and Tolkien's like, it's not metaphors, and Vance is like, it's all metaphors.
I mean, this is like, not just the hero's journey, but literally exactly about, killing dragons and dragons hoarding gold and like literally everything we've been talking about since the start of all of this. Brian, what was your take on? Oh, go ahead, Danica.
Oh, I was just gonna say, yeah, and like Bilbo's very relatable as like, he's very timid at first, and then he, like through this journey, he just gains momentum and being brave, and so yeah, slaying dragons.
Brian, what was your take? Did you listen or read this book?
I listened to it in the Combine, and it's just like straightforward. We're walking, we got captured. We got captured again. Oh, we got captured. And, but yeah, it's very straightforward. I watched the movies too. They suck. don't waste your time on them. They're mostly like there's a ton of stuff that's not in the book at all. And it's like, hey, don't forget, we made the Lord of the Rings movies. This is what's happening in those. So they're not worth your time.
Yeah, because they have like Legolas is in the second movie, right? And even the third, maybe?
Yeah, I think he's in
there's like a love between one of the dwarves and an elf.
Yeah, and there's a bad mix of like live and CGI. It's all.
Yeah, I'm like the opposite. I love that it's like they added stuff. Like the movie to me is just totally different than like the book. Like I mean, I just don't like need them to be the same, but I know a lot of people disagree.
The last one does a good job with Thorin going a little nuts with the treasure and kind of falling apart.
I think it's great, Danica, that you have that perspective, right? Like that you don't have to have the two match up. It has no bearing on your enjoyment of either of them, because it gives you two pieces of art to like instead of loving one and resenting the other.
Yeah, and I think like fandoms can get really caught up on that, but I don't know. Like everyone has a preference.
This was not canon.
Is it almost like two stories? I confess I don't do movies because I can't handle the plot development and the way they handle details relative to the book. But is it almost like two stories, Danica?
No, I mean like a lot of things happen that are like the same, and like it really does okay on like some of the things, but like it does add like this dumb romance between one of the dwarves and an elf, and like they do add like the barrel scene is totally different, and I can't think like the battle I think is different as well. I don't know. It's been a while.
I think they did do a really good job though of making, to Brian's point, Thorin's death more meaningful too, where like that gets really emphasized over the course of that third movie, and then like it seems more impactful at the end of it too, where it's like Billy Boyd singing that sad song at the end, and they're all parting ways.
Thorin's death in the book was like half a page. And I was like, oh.
Yeah, it's kind of like, oh, he got shot with some arrows. He's dead.
Farewell, friend.
Actually, I finished this a couple of weeks ago, and I've been wanting to do this for a while. I've been listening to this ought to be book club. It's awesome. Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, which is what Blade Runner is based on, and the themes are the same, but they are very, very.
I was actually just going to point the same thing out. I know where you're going here.
I haven't watched Blade Runner for a while, but like the first few hours of the book, I'm like, none of this happened in the movie.
Yeah, right. Like Mercerism and empathy box and all that crazy stuff that's fascinating. Yeah. But like, that's exactly, I was going to point out an example very much like that, right? So I do consider them as separate entities, and it's okay if the movie doesn't represent the book, as long as it's a good movie in and of itself, right? Which I felt like was not the case with the Hobbit one, but whatever, we don't have to argue about that. I'm just saying it's okay. With you there.
What was your question? You had a really good question, I thought, Ian, that kind of tied to the book.
I have hard times saying stuff, and it works better if I just write it down.
Okay, so Ian's question was, is the relationship between Bilbo and the Saxville Bagginses similar or significantly related to the conflict between the dwarves' conflict with Smaug? After all, the Saxville Bagginses did attempt to run him out of his hobbit hole, just like Smaug ran the dwarves out from their home under the mountain.
Wow. That's pretty good. And they wanted all of his stuff too.
Yeah.
That's interesting. It might be that the Sackville Bagginses were like a Hobbit-sized version of a dragon, right? And then the dragon was a real world thing outside of the Shire. And that he really did have experience having conflicts and adventures, but they were tiny Hobbit-sized adventures.
Dang, Ian, that was good.
Small people, small problems.
That was his own words too.
What were you gonna say, Brian?
Well, they didn't get into too much, like if they had not gone back after the treasure. And I guess I was trying to think, oh, this is like medieval pride or whatever, all this stuff. But like, if they hadn't gone on this adventure, there'd be a lot of people not dead. I mean, they started a whole war between 5 factions, and Lake Town got burned and all this other stuff. And at the end, it's like, hey, Bilbo, you're a good guy.
I thought the concept of ownership was less than clear and less than perfect in all of this, right? Like the dwarves owning all that gold, they didn't actually mine. I mean, like, I guess they acquired it through the things that they had bought and built, but then they would steal things back from the trolls that weren't theirs, but since the trolls had stolen it, it was okay for them to take it from the trolls. It was kind of an interesting, like, belief in what you can take from other people.
That the dwarves mined all of the gold and made those items out of their love of, you know, things craft, right? And that's what filled all the halls, cups and carvings and all, you know.
Well, and them getting paid for making those things for others.
So I think the whole reason for all this like destruction and craziness is like Gandalf, you know, brought all these people together, or at least the hobbits and the dwarves. And Gandalf's end case, like, it doesn't really talk about it in this book, but is to defeat Sauron, I think it is. And so this is like a step into like getting the land good again so they can fight the battle that's to come further in the series.
Gandalf is the daemon.
Yeah, he's
wow. Wow.
He's viewing the world from
Way up here.
much higher up.
We're just playing checkers down here.
Or chess. Chess is more advanced.
No, we're playing checkers. He's playing chess.
Yeah.
It is interesting that we got this far and didn't mention Gandalf at all. He's an interesting character. He does, like, he jumps from place to place and disappears at important times and reappears. He's kind of like a god or some kind of, like what is hero
He's
with
like
a
an
thousand
archangel.
faces.
Yeah, he's like an instigator or the wise old man in the hero's
That,
journey or
yeah,
something like
yeah,
that.
exactly. That's what I'm getting at, right? Like he shows up with the help, the supernatural help at the right time,
Or he's just a meddler.
Benevolent.
I mean, the idea of him being the daemon is an interesting one, right? Where like it's the call to adventure that Bilbo never would have heard. It's also the thing where he believed in Bilbo when even Bilbo didn't. And so like it is the perfect hero's journey call to adventure. And when you go look at the lore of Lord of the Rings and the whole thing, he's like the level, he's not God, but he's like one level below that at like
God.
the archangel. Yeah.
Yeah, Damon viewing him as a Damien really puts a different spin on him. I hadn't thought of that. I like that connection.
Yeah, I thought that was a great point for Danica, like to zoom out like that, because it does have a whole lot more meaning to the I guess like what Brian said, which is valid when you like take that slice and look at the Hobbit as like one unit of a story where it's like, all right, Bilbo, you're a good guy. I guess that's the moral of the story. But if you do look at it way out here with all of that context of knowing the background, then yeah, there's a whole lot more meaning to, oh, he meets Gollum and that's what gets the ring out and he gives the ring to Frodo. And there's all this additional context that takes place after that.
I wonder if he had this larger story in mind when he wrote this. I know that he had developed a lot of the lore of that world and all, but I don't know about the storyline of it kind of feels like George Lucas talking about like, oh, I was actually setting all this stuff up when I wrote Star Wars, and I intended all these other things to happen. And I don't really believe what he says about that.
Rob's no fan of George Lucas, by the way. He thinks Star Wars was an accident.
I mean, don't get me wrong. I loved it a lot when I was a kid,
The lost journals of the Wills or whatever he wanted to call it, like originally, that like somehow became Star Wars.
Yeah, it's unrecognizable.
I thought maybe there was going to be more of Gollum at the end that was going to come back and cause some trouble, because I thought that scene in the cave was one of the best parts of the book, if not the best, because it just seemed, if you know what goes on later, it's really a menacing thing when they're playing that riddle game in the cave. So I thought maybe he'd show up at the end of the book, but I guess not.
30 white horses on a red hill. First they champ, then they stamp, then they stand still.
Going back to the Gandalf knowing that this was going to start the overarching story, possibly, it makes me wonder if he knew the ring was on the island with Gollum.
Yeah, I got the impression he knew something was going on with Bilbo, but I didn't know if he actually knew what it was. Like when he would disappear.
Yeah, I thought, was there a line, and I'm trying not to conflate the book and the movie, where, I don't know, he kind of says something or gives him a nod, like he sees him slip it in his pocket. But
it's almost right from the right when they first see Gandalf again, right when he finds the dwarves and meets up with everybody. I think he knows there, and then the rest of the dwarves don't. Was my recollection of it.
Brian, your mic's on.
It's staticky.
Not Scott.
Brian Moses got the static.
He's out loading poop.
Sorry, did it go away?
No.
If you mute, it'll be good.
I can mute him.
Thank you.
All right, so we've got about 5 minutes left before 8:30, and then I've got a hard stop because I got to go put a baby to bed. But you guys can keep talking. What I wanted to spend the last 5 minutes talking about is the 7 Pillars of Wisdom. So this book is what we had talked about being our long-term book, and I think that what we should do is have it be both November and December's book, because I'm reading it now and it is a brilliant and amazing book, but it is going to take some time to read. So I wanted to check in and make sure you guys were on the same page. If anybody else had started, how you guys felt about the book so far.
It is dense for sure.
Is there an Audible version?
Yeah.
Probably.
Yeah, I have it. I'm trying to
I haven't.
find the hours. It's long. I'm gonna finish Blade Runner tomorrow, and then I think I'll.
I thought it was
started
about the same
tomorrow.
as Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. I just think that when you're reading it with the book, Zen was a lot faster to read.
It's 10 hours.
20?
Long. It's 25 hours.
Yeah, 25 hours on Audible.
I think Zen was like 15.
Yeah, my hard copy is like 660 pages or something like that, and Zen was like 450.
But I'll tell you, like, from my own personal experience, I have lived with Muslims. I have known people from Saudi Arabia, all over that part of the world. And the way that he writes is so beautiful and so precise that it's not difficult for me to read because it's like, oh, it's so difficult, his words. It's that I hang on every word. It's so interesting. So if anybody's sitting there being like, oh no, I don't want to read this really difficult book, it is beautiful. The guy is clearly a poet. It's amazing.
Yeah, that's right. It's really dense. It's amazing. It's really good. Like, I'm a huge fan of Lawrence of Arabia, the movie, the David Lean film. And this is an exciting new angle. I love it so far.
I feel like it's one of those books that you finish it and you're really proud of the fact that you made it through it. Like that the experience of it, what you learn from it, and I don't know. So I'm excited about it, and I don't want anybody to be intimidated, but it is worth reading for 2 months. So what I was thinking was, let's just pick the halfway point, whatever that is, page 300 or something, and we can talk about in November about how it's going, to the halfway point, and then that way we don't try and cover all 600 pages just in December. But does that sound good to you guys?
I think that's a great plan.
Definitely.
We
worth it as
should
well.
make sure that Mike knows that that's what we're doing, because he didn't participate this month because he was working on the 7 pillars. So to make sure that he knows
Okay,
for November.
that's a good call.
Okay, I'll let him know in AVN. I'll send him a message.
Yeah, it'd be nice to like post kind of where we're at in the book club, like more, I don't know, like reminders, because I got confused with Zen and the Art last time. So
Okay, that's good feedback. I never want to be like too much in there, but I realized today I probably should have said something to, like a couple of days ago that book club was happening here. And so actually this is a good time to talk about AVN. Sober October, almost done. Pretty exciting. And I haven't checked the poll results yet, but it's looking like journaling is a go for next month, trying to say we're going to take some dedicated time for people to, we're going to get prompts. So once a week, we'll start with a new prompt. We won't do a new prompt every day. It'll just be like, we've got a prompt for the week. This is something to think about. And then everybody committing to spending, I typically journal for about 10 minutes a day, but if you've never done it before, I figure like just start with 5 and see what happens at the end of it. And kind of the overarching goal is to be developing more words for the pattern language. So I don't know if Ben, you want to take a little bit of a chance while we're talking with everybody here about what you've been working on?
Yeah, I was going to throw a post in the network tomorrow, but yeah, I've just been throwing down some of the pattern language terms that seem obvious that we've thrown around, or we've thrown around to me. We talked about a couple over the weekend, so I've got just 7 or 8 terms with like probably a paragraph blurb on each. Some terms like annealing, like we know maybe like you could Google what annealing means as it pertains to something like metallurgy, but the way that we kind of abstract that concept and refer to it with other sorts of domains inside the network. There's the pound, noise versus signal, just some of the novelty search, some of these concepts, the daemon that we throw around, putting those in. Like right now, I've got it in a document on Notion, and tomorrow when I throw a post up, you'll be able to hop in there and you can edit that document, kind of similar to like a Google Doc. So I would encourage anybody, because I know for me specifically, maybe Vance, you might take more record, but like I guess just personally, like that, it seems like I hear them so maybe common that like there might be other words that maybe stick out. If there's, long story short, if there's any words that stick out to anybody where you're like, oh, this is a term that comes up a lot in this community that maybe I don't hear a lot in other circles. So that's maybe an example of our pattern language. Like Nicholas DM'd me quite a few today, so I'll put those in there. But that's basically where we're at with that. And then we'll throw that up for the start of November, being Pattern Language Month, just as a resource for anybody. Because picture somebody new who comes in, and we're throwing around these terms like daemon and pattern language and novelty search. There's like a whole lot of background versus just like, hey, here's this document where we've got some of the terminologies we throw around in here.
And the way that I paired this idea up with journaling is that journaling is a way for you to take some time to reflect and think about things. And sometimes you'll be like, hey, I've spotted this idea and I want to share it with other people to see if they've also seen it. And then once somebody else sees it and you agree, and then you start being able to use that term out in the rest of the world, that it helps explain something important, then that's when it becomes a part of the pattern language. And so I think these two are kind of intermixed, and the journaling exercise will be the shared experience that we're doing. Like this month was Sober October, so November will be journaling. Sound good? Does it make sense? All right.
Were you gonna go back and look at any of like the as the crow fly terms?
That's good. I probably should. Sky hooking. That's a good one. Yeah.
Shake the floor, that kind of stuff.
Oh man. Dang, Joseph, you remember really well. Yeah, I should do that. That's a good call. That's a really good call. I'll do that. Those predate Ben. All right, guys, I got to go give a little baby a bath and put her to bed, but I can make somebody else the moderator if you guys want to stay on. But great conversation. Sorry it was so late, Brian Scott. I'm not on Twitter right now, so, and we'll see you guys.
See you, Vance.
Hey, everybody.
I think I'm hopping off too. Got a lot of homework.
Same. I got to bring a
Danica.
coffee.
Thanks for coming on.
See you guys.
All right. See you guys.